under pressure. Boris Johnson fights for his political life.
He's got a new defence. Nobody warned me that it was against the rules. Since the Prime Minister wrote the walls, why on earth does he think this new defence is going to work for him?
The Right Honourable Gentleman is continuing to ask a series of questions which he knows will be fully addressed by the inquiry.
On the day one of his own MPs defected to Labour, another bitter blow. A former minister and one-time ally calling time on his leadership.
You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Well, Boris Johnson's well known, of course, as a survivor, but can even he come back from this? Also tonight, goodbye to Plan B. The government announces the end of most Omicron measures.
They're £2 for £1. Like before, they used to be £3 for £1.
Fears for those already feeling the squeeze as inflation surges to its highest in 30 years. And even cooler runnings, Jamaica's first Olympic skier on his journey from Northamptonshire to the slopes.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. With speculation over Boris Johnson's future becoming ever more feverish, today's session of Prime Minister's Questions was always likely to be a challenging one. Mr Johnson had to face the Tory defector Christian Wakeford, who crossed the floor to Labour's benches. And then he had to fend off repeated demands for his resignation, with even the Tory grandee, David Davis, a former Brexit ally, now calling on him to go. The Prime Minister deflected every bar by referring to the Partygate inquiry due out next week. But as our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports, the pressing question tonight is whether or when he'll be facing a confidence vote from within his own party.
How close is he to waving goodbye? No one knows, and getting rid of a Prime Minister can be a long journey. But even as Boris Johnson's convoy pulled out of Downing Street this morning, a Conservative MP was pulling out of the Tory party and joining Labour. Watch the cheering Labour benches as Christian Wakeford walked to their side of the chamber and sat down right behind the leader of the opposition.
Can I start by warmly welcoming the Honourable Member for Bury South to his new place and to the Parliamentary Labour Party.
The Conservative Party won Bury South for the first time in generations under this Prime Minister, with an agenda of uniting and levelling up and delivering for the people of Bury South. And, Mr Speaker, we will win again in Bury South at the next election under this Prime Minister.
But questions quickly turned to whether the Prime Minister knew the event he attended in the Downing Street Garden on the 20th of May was a party.
If the Prime Minister's new defence were true, it requires the Prime Minister to ask us to accept that as he waded through the empty bottles and platters of sandwiches, he didn't realise it was a party. Does the Prime Minister realise how ridiculous that sounds?
Of course, Mr Speaker, we must wait for the outcome of the inquiry.
But not everyone's ready to wait, and the Prime Minister was ambushed by a former cabinet colleague.
I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
How many feel that way, we don't know. But a Tory vote of no confidence is triggered when 54 letters are sent to the backbench 1922 chairman. Either side needs 180 votes to win it. If the Prime Minister wins, he's protected from another vote for 12 months. If he loses, there's a leadership election.
Do you want to come and sit down?
Christian Wakeford's defection means one less Tory letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister. Instead, he was signing his Labour membership and explaining his decision.
For the moment, we've got a party trying to defend the indefensible. they're doing so gladly. That's not right. It's not fair, and it doesn't respect the country or the office.
In Wakeford's Bury South constituency, not many took the Prime Minister's side today.
People have resigned for less, and I think the right option is to apologise to the nation and to resign.
If he doesn't know the rules and he's made up the rules, then I think it's time for him to go.
Who would replace him is the question, really, isn't it? Because there's not an obvious person, I don't think.
And as Boris Johnson returned home, that does weigh in his favour. He lost an MP today, he gained a high-profile opponent, but he still doesn't face a challenger. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
So another extraordinary day and a series of extraordinary days at Westminster. Let's get some reaction now. Robert Peston's in his studio in West London. Our Deputy Political Editor Anushka Astana is in the Houses of Parliament. Let's turn to Anushka first of all. After all the drama today, what is the atmosphere that you're finding among Tory MPs tonight?
Well, over the past 2 days, the atmosphere has been febrile. I spoke to some of the newer MPs who went to that meeting of 20 yesterday. They were not only angry with the Prime Minister, they were furious with the pressure they were coming under. They thought that the no confidence letters were going to build up today. But weirdly, that defection by Christian Wakeford has sort of acted, at least for today, as good news for the Prime Minister. As one Cabinet Minister I bumped into earlier said, it's almost brought a bit of unity to the party. Another MP suggested that people were actually withdrawing their no confidence letters today, or so he had heard. Even a rebel said to me that however they feel about the Prime Minister, there's more anger with Christian Wakeford tonight. That said, the rebels said they had not withdrawn their letter and that they hadn't heard of other people who had withdrawn their letters either. They said that while this might have bought Boris Johnson some time, perhaps until Sue Gray reports, they were still angry and they still wanted him to go. Others are saying the same thing, but for now it feels calmer.
All right, Anushka in the House of Parliament, thank you. So, turning to you, Robert, then it looks like the Prime Minister lives to fight another day at least. Is the next key moment going to be the publication of Sue Gray's inquiry into the Downing Street parties?
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, it does seem extraordinary to say that this has been a relatively good day for the Prime Minister when we've seen, probably the most senior former minister, David Davis, who served under every Tory Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher, quoting Cromwell and indeed Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain and telling the Prime Minister to push off. But the precious commodity that the Prime Minister has bought today is time, because there was speculation, even first thing this morning, that he would face a confidence vote. And if we look at the history of confidence votes in the Tory party, even when a Prime Minister and leader wins that vote, actually the display of many tens of your own MPs being against you means you can't survive. Margaret Thatcher couldn't survive when she won, and let's be clear, Theresa May couldn't survive when she won. So the Prime Minister is desperate to avoid this vote. And what he basically persuaded people today to do is to judge him when we get the report into those infamous parties by Sue Gray, the senior Cabinet Office civil servant. And between now and then, he will be putting enormous pressure on his backbench MPs not to put in letters, to stick with him, to withdraw letters. But when I talk to those disgruntled Tory MPs about what Sue Gray could possibly say to persuade them that Boris Johnson is the right person to lead them into the election, I get deafening silence. So let's be absolutely clear, he was in trouble yesterday. The Prime Minister is still in trouble. OK, Robert Peston, thank you. Well, if, as we see, the Partygate saga continues to be something of a nightmare for Mr Johnson, then maybe he's hoping that the bonfire of COVID laws he announced for England today might provide some much-needed warmth. But the belief that Omicron has peaked, along with the rollout of the vaccine booster, has prompted the government to lift many of the Plan B measures against coronavirus. Let's get more now from our health editor, Emily Morgan.
If the success of our booster campaign had anything to do with lifting restrictions, ministers might want to look away now. This drive-through vaccine site near Liverpool was empty this morning. Booster rates might have slowed, but so too has COVID.
Our scientists believe it is likely that the Omicron wave has now peaked nationally. So the Cabinet concluded that because of the extraordinary booster campaign, together with the way the public have responded to the Plan B measures, we can return to Plan A in England and allow Plan B regulations to expire.
He said because hospital admissions have stabilised, measures can be eased from today. Advice to work from home has been dropped. Face coverings in all settings will be scrapped next Thursday and from tomorrow in classrooms. Venues will no longer require COVID passes, and the legal requirement to self-isolate is expected to be lifted by the 24th of March.
We will trust the judgment of the British people.
Listening to the Prime Minister was Angela in Sutton Coldfield. Her hotel has been hit very hard by the Plan B restrictions.
The impact of people losing confidence and cancelling bookings, particularly in our busy Christmas period, was quite devastating. We're certainly down probably about 30% in what we would normally have done on a normal Christmas. So the relaxation of the work from home message is really, really important for us.
Despite the economic benefits, some question the wisdom of dropping restrictions while COVID rates are still high.
I would plead with people, go on doing what you know how to do. This pandemic is not finished, and if suddenly everybody in Britain decides they're going to ditch all the precautions, there's a real risk that it could rebound with a vengeance, and that would be really unpleasant.
Come March, the Health Secretary says we could be the freest country in Europe. The question is, do we really want to be? Emily Morgan, ITV News.
And if you would like more detail on the measures that are being lifted, then visit our website, which has all the information you need. Now, there will be many households across the UK wondering just how they're going to cope after the cost of living surged to its highest level in almost 30 years. Inflation jumped 5.4% last month. That's the worst since March 1992. Our economics editor Joel Hills reports now on the huge pressure on household incomes.
They're 2 for £1. Like before, they used to be 3 for £1.
Kamisha is a single mother with 4 children who relies on benefits.
How much this is? Wow, it's £3.49.
What was that?
It used to be about £2.50.
High inflation leaves everyone feeling worse off, but those on the lowest incomes really struggle.
If I have to borrow, I'm in so much debt. I have to borrow just to cover the basics, so
that's not sustainable, is it?
Not at all. And it's not good for my mental health either, things like this, because it's really not good.
Inflation has been rising ever since restrictions began lifting last spring. The headline rate reached 5.4% in December, a 30-year high and well above the Bank of England's target rate of 2%. Gas and electricity bills are much, much higher than they were a year ago, and even food prices are now rising faster than pay. It's the Bank of England's job to keep prices low and stable. Prices are currently neither of those things. The Bank of England raised interest rates to contain inflation in December, and it may do so again next month. The bank's concern is that the squeeze on living standards prompts workers to ask for higher pay rises, which companies then finance by raising their prices again. High inflation hurts businesses too. Printing newspapers will become even more expensive when energy bills rise again in April. This company in Glasgow is being hit from all sides.
We've seen huge increases in costs in the past year, from raw materials to newsprint, plastics, the items we use within the manufacturing process, ink, strapping tape, underwrap, chemistry, as much as 30 and 40%.
Inflation is high and rising because of a surge in energy prices, supply chain disruption and an increase in spending on goods that occurred during lockdown. These are global issues and should be short-lived.
How much is tilapia?
But 2022 is going to be a difficult year for Kamisha and many others. Joel Hills, ITV News.
Still to come, the ITV Evening News. Another eyewitness report from Afghanistan on the young orphans dreading winter. And the care home residents recreating classic art for a stunning charity calendar. Those stories and more after this very short break. Welcome back. Amid the humanitarian disaster gripping Afghanistan, there are thousands of displaced children with nowhere to live and nobody to care for them. More than a third of the country's children's homes have been shut. Those that do remain are finding it almost impossible to cope. As John Ray discovered when he visited a children's home in Kabul for his latest special report for us, many desperate youngsters are simply being turned away.
You see their faces everywhere. The children who destiny has dealt a losing hand, picking over for a pitiful living the rubbish dumps of Kabul. Habibullah is 12 years old. He tells us he alone supports 5 brothers and 2 sisters. If success has many fathers, then here the West's 2 decades of failure has bequeathed a multitude of orphans. These are Afghanistan's lost boys. Nawab's father was a Taliban fighter. Saeed's fought and died on the other side for the Afghan army. Now they share boyhood dreams.
You'll be a footballer.
Oh, footballers.
But in their hearts they will perhaps already know a more dismal future is mapped out.
There are 300 boys looked after here, but they have room for many, many more, as many as 1,000. What they don't have is the money. Every day, desperate mothers and fathers come along to try to give their children a home here, and every day they have to turn them away. There's nothing they can do to help.
When we reject them and we say suffer them our problem, they crying.
Across the city, another lost child and another weeping father. He lost his wife, who was 8 months pregnant, in the explosion at Kabul airport last August, the last violent act in the tragedy that was the West's withdrawal.
I saw hundreds of bodies. We looked for my daughter, but we couldn't find her. The ambulance came, but my wife died before we got to the hospital.
Now he can barely feed the children he has left. This man was once a wedding singer. It's a job illegal under the Taliban.
I've been threatened several times. Now I'm trying to leave the country. There is no life for us here.
But in the privacy of this room, he will play for us a song of love for Afghanistan. The homeless and the hungry haunt the streets of Kabul and should perhaps haunt policymakers from Washington to London who promise them a much better future than this. John Ray, ITV News, Kabul.
The Vietnamese leader of a people smuggling gang has been sentenced to 15 years in prison in Belgium over the deaths of 39 people who were transported to the UK in a sealed lorry. Vo Van Hon was one of 18 defendants given sentences for their roles in the smuggling operation between Vietnam and Britain. The bodies were found at an industrial park in Essex in 2019. Police in Ireland have arrested a second man in the investigation into the murder of Aisling Murphy. The 23-year-old teacher was attacked while out exercising last week. The man is suspected of withholding information. Another man remains in custody on suspicion of murder. And here, the government has launched a long-awaited review into the treatment of LGBT veterans who were expelled from Britain's armed forces because of their sexuality. The Cabinet Office will hear stories from those who were stripped of their jobs and even jailed under existing laws at the time. Now, one of the athletes whose legendary deeds inspired the film Cool Running spoke to ITV News tonight about Jamaica's latest star of the Winter Olympics. Benjamin Alexander, a British-born former DJ, is set to become the country's first ever Olympic skier. Martha Fairley reports.
Benjamin Alexander is about to make sporting history as Jamaica's first alpine skier to compete in the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, baby!
Born in Britain, he only took up the sport 6 years ago in his 30s. Next month, he'll be at the Beijing Games.
I wasn't born to a wealthy family. I wasn't born anywhere near mountains, and I didn't have anyone in my immediate family or friend group that skied. And so if I'm able to go from zero to Olympian in 6 years, I think it just shows that anything is possible. And if there's like a hobby, a task, or a sport that you're hesitant to get into because you think it's too late, I think my story shows that that's absolutely not the case.
It's bobsled time! He was in part inspired by the first Jamaican bobsleigh team immortalised in the film Cool Runnings. They've been giving Benjamin advice and encouragement to make the most of his Olympic dream.
I want him to take a moment to enjoy the experience. I think he's going to be competent. He's not going to win the race, not going to set the world on fire, but I think he's going to go from start to finish upright, and he's going to ski hard.
And Benjamin agrees he'll be doing his best to keep his feet on the ground.
I just want to deliver a respectable performance and not kill myself. That's really what I'm looking at. So here we go. First ever Jamaican alpine skier. I'm really excited to getting to Beijing and to be out there with some of the best skiers in the world, which I'm not one of, but you know, I'm just very excited to be there and be a part of the Olympic spirit.
Oh God! Because taking part is what it's all about. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
And good luck to him. And finally, you might think that the charity calendar peaked when members of the Women's Institute in a Yorkshire village took their clothes off and prompted the film Calendar Girls. But perhaps the residents of an Oxfordshire care home have gone one better. Helped by the staff, they dressed up to recreate, with remarkable accuracy, a series of classic paintings. Sejal Karia reports.
They're famous paintings as you've never seen them before. The old masters fashioned into new works of art by care home residents and now being exhibited in a calendar. Dave, who's 74, became Man with Pipe by Modigliani, and he's become a hit online.
A few people recognise me from Facebook, is it? I'm even going to start charging for my autograph.
Kath's 88, and she posed as Virgin in Prayer by Salvi. And she wasn't, well, as thrilled as Dave with her photo.
It's just the cloth that's round my head. It makes me look old.
And Bob, who's 85, posed with Wynne for their recreation of American Gothic by Grant Wood. He too was modest about his contribution.
It's all right, apart from this guy in the right inside. He's ugly.
I think he looks really rather handsome.
No?
I think he looks rather handsome.
You want to borrow my glasses?
We've put everything up in the foyer so everybody can see the pictures that they've taken, and that they're all very pleased with it, and the families are too.
And how do you feel it's turned out?
Oh, very proud of them all, you know.
Vicky's already thinking about ideas for next year's calendar. All the money raised will pay for more fun activities for the residents. Sejal Karia, ITV News, Oxfordshire.
Fabulous, isn't it? That's it for now. Julie's here with news at 10, but from me and all the team here, bye-bye.